So religions, in a lot of ways, religions don't teach what they preach. And what I mean by that is that they teach things that they're almost ignorant of the true meaning behind. But in doing so, they still accomplish the task of teaching it in ignorance rather than in rational understanding. For example, when we hear about being baptized to enter into the kingdom of heaven and to be cleansed of demons, in actuality, the origination of this ritualistic behavior has more so of a meaning derived from early hygienic practices, which in essence translated to being able to actually form a body of society itself. Because if people were walking around dirty in the sense that they carried pathogens and disease all the time, they wouldn't necessarily be able to communicate as an organized group because pathogens and disease would be spread amongst them. And thus we see the early beginnings of this whole mistranslation and how people today still see it in light of a mythical viewpoint and perspective rather than the practical and applicable perspective in which it was originally, conceived as, where God is merely the notion that the light within all living things. And so if you yourself are to enter into the kingdom of God, being an organized body which actually acts and manifests the ideals of morals and behaviors which allow them to cooperate as a group, that being, said becomes, in a sense, God itself. And so we see what these ritualistic behaviors actually do is allow groups and societies to become psychologically and emotionally connected to that which they find themselves within. And the originations themselves, within language and within the texts, actually holds true to the statement. It's just we have to almost defer the translation of demon to something more similar within language today. And, it goes back to circumcision as well, where these highly ritualistic behaviors have more of an origination in control of a group and the psychological influence through highly ritualistic behaviors and through hygienic practices, which make the practical application of an organized body and a group of individuals being able to harmoniously live amongst one another without the spread of demons or demonic influences, which we merely translate as pathogens and disease. And then what we find is that this group or body itself kind of embodies the notions and the ideals of God, and or what they themselves to perceive to be God as. Whatever that perception is relative to the group we're speaking about. But what ends up happening is it's almost like the very strict nature of the group itself actually restricts people from more so having demonic influences in their lives on a psychosocial level, because you're very intertwined with the society in which you find yourself, and so you're much less likely to act out upon carnal and natural desires which may in fact be disharmonious to a hierarchical societal system on its own. And so what we find is that these demonic influences, or what people perceive or mistranslate as demons or satanic influences, are weeded out through the hierarchical system of the society which this ritualistic behavior of cleansing has actually created itself. And then the whole system itself just builds up from that foundation and that floor, where now we have all these other postulations of clean and dirty. And as the organized body acts upon these things within the group, what ends up happening is things present themselves outside of this group that don't necessarily follow the behaviors or the godlike qualities that they perceive to be godlike qualities within the group itself. And so then we actually see that the organized body, in a sense, becomes pure and clean, because not only are they psychologically in tune with some moral and ethical character in which they deem to be godlike qualities, but also on the molecular and biological level, they are clean as well due to the ritualistic behaviors in which they participate within. And it's kind of funny because they don't teach this, but they're teaching it. They don't teach the rational understanding portion of the mind, yet they appease to the emotional and psychological or subconscious level, where by influencing people towards these behaviors, they're allowing them to structuralize an organized body, which in itself manifests the ideals which they attribute to God. And, of angels and things to that extent, which they themselves become the acting participaries of. And so what we find is that as soon as they define these qualities, things outside of the organization itself then manifest themselves as demons or as satanic influences or things to that extent, because they're in opposition, which is the translation itself of Satan. It merely means opposition. So any force outside of this organization or religious body which is in opposition to the ideals and practices taught within it are in effect demonic and satanic, because they do not represent what the organized body itself believes to be the will or the actual practice of godlike qualities. And so that is how a lot of religious bodies today, they teach what they don't teach, because they're not preaching to the rational understanding mind, which digests all this material and tries to understand why it is that people instigated these practices. Well, the reason that they did so was so that there could be a society, and society and the collectiveness of said society itself is in essence the translation of old, meaning God, where mankind was the stewards over the earth because they had power to, in a sense, alter the course of nature itself. And so there we get the whole story of Adam and Eve in the garden and whatever have you, where a lot of these stories really do have rational and practical application. You just have to look a little bit more beyond what is merely taught within the bodies and organizations that teach them themselves, and try to really understand how it is that they might actually play an important role within society today, and not necessarily such a mystical and esoteric meaning, but more of a practical application could actually be gained by looking at things in such a degree where it's not necessarily like there are satanic and demonic influences which organize themselves and cause destruction and harm upon the face of the planet. But in actuality, if you really translate the words, then there actually is. Because is there not organisms which, in a sense, cause dismay and harm upon bodies? And if we translate the word demon into said organism itself, then they exist. And are there not organizations and bodies of groups which, in a sense, have ulterior viewpoints on the world in a manner not necessarily conforming to the conventional notion of moral and ethical behaviors in regards to mankind and to individual life? Then yes, if those organizations do exist, then I guess there are satanic organizations and bodies and groups upon the face of the planet at this moment. So, it's all just kind of about retranslating the words to fit our daily use and understanding of language today, and actually how they may have been practically applied back in the time to, house some sort of knowledge which they did understand at that time. They may have attributed it to some other degree than we attribute it today, but in no way does that make it any less significant, because they're still, in a sense, talking about the same thing. You need to cleanse your body of demons, which not only today, if we say that somebody is psychologically unstable and that they may carry pathogens or disease, in a lot of ways, finding yourself in a structured and organized body, which ritualistically embodies clean behavior itself, could actually rid somebody of said demons in a way. And the body and organized structure of itself allows society to harmoniously live amongst one another. And it's kind of weird because we have all these groups and organizations on the face of the planet, and some of them teach it this way and some of them teach it the other way. Some appeal to more of like the emotional perspective and not necessarily rational understanding, and some preach towards rational understanding. However, people hold on to their belief systems, um, and they constantly are attacking one another, when in a lot of ways they're kind of teaching the same thing, but just in a different way. I can tell people that they need to shower, they need to participate as a group, and they need to be cleanly and hygienic, and they need to participate in actions and be involved in healthy behaviors, which aren't necessarily detrimental towards their own physical condition, but their psychological condition as well. Or I could try to put the fear of God into them, so to speak, and the fear of judgment and whatever have you, which actually accomplishes almost the same goal, but it's coming to the same conclusion, however, in a different way. So, which way is necessarily the better way? Well, in a lot of ways, I think it's has to do a lot with who it is that you're speaking with, and maybe where it is that they find themselves. Uh, so yeah, it's not like angels and demons actually really do exist, but depending on how you look at it, they kind of do. Peace out.